think it was during that time period when I started to think about things. I was petrified about it, by the way. And, we got through it. And
Simon Cowell, the name alone commands attention. The man who built an empire through sheer willpower and unfiltered honesty. For years, he ruled the world of entertainment with a sharp tongue, fearless attitude, and iron grip on success. He was the judge everyone feared, yet secretly admired. The man who could make or break a dream with a single glance. But behind that polished exterior and powerful presence, life was quietly preparing a storm that no amount of fame, money, or control could stop. One hospital visit changed everything. In that sterile room, Simon heard words every parent dreads. His young son had been diagnosed with something that would redefine his world forever. Suddenly, the flashing lights, roaring fans, and red carpets faded into silence. The man who once lived for the spotlight chose to walk away from it. What could drive Simon Cowell, the unstoppable titan of television, to let it all go? This is the story behind his emotional goodbye. For decades, Simon Cowell was more than just a television judge. He was a global powerhouse. He spent years crafting his name into a brand the world recognized. Every week, millions tuned in to watch him on their screens. His sharp remarks and brutal honesty made him both loved and feared, a personality that defined modern television. From Pop Idol to American Idol, The X Factor, and Britain's Got Talent, Simon became the face of talent shows everywhere. His ability to spot stars and his fearless way of saying exactly what he thought made him the center of attention time and time again. But Simon wasn't just a man of opinions. He was a businessman with a golden touch. His company, Psycho Productions, not only produced hit shows, but also discovered and managed artists who went on to dominate the music industry. His world revolved around music and television, fast-paced, ruthless, and all-consuming. Work always came first. Long hours, endless flights, meetings stacked one after another. Simon thrived in chaos until 2013, when his life took a dramatic turn. That year, Simon began dating Lauren Silverman, a woman who at the time was married to his close friend, Andrew Silverman. When Andrew discovered the affair, the news exploded. He filed for divorce and publicly named Simon in the documents, instantly turning the private drama into a media firestorm. Within days, the story was everywhere, splashed across headlines, dissected on talk shows, whispered about in Hollywood's corners. But then came an even bigger revelation. Lauren was pregnant with Simon's child. The scandal was explosive. Reporters followed every move, but surprisingly, the divorce never went to court. In August of that year, the Silvermans settled the matter privately, keeping the most painful details away from the public eye. Simon avoided direct involvement in the legal chaos, though his name had already been dragged through it. Soon after, Simon confirmed what the world had already guessed. Lauren was expecting his baby. And on February 14th, 2014, their son Eric was born. That day didn't just mark the birth of his first child, it marked the rebirth of Simon Cowell himself. The man who once claimed he never wanted to be a father suddenly found his entire world shifted. Fame, fortune, success, none of it compared to holding his son for the first time. It wasn't just another chapter in Simon's story. It was the moment that made him stop, breathe, and truly look at his life, perhaps for the first time. He had always believed he was too set in his ways, too focused, too busy, too independent. Work came first, always. The idea of raising a child had never crossed his mind in any serious way. He liked his freedom, his schedule, his success. But then, everything changed. The moment he saw that ultrasound, the tiny flicker of life on the screen, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just excitement. It was something deeper, almost spiritual. The man who once swore he'd never have children suddenly couldn't stop thinking about family, about the kind of father he might become. about the legacy he would leave behind. When the time came to choose a name, there was no hesitation. Eric Philip Cowell. It wasn't just a name, it was a bridge between generations. Philip, his late father's name, carried weight, emotion, and a sense of continuity. Naming his son after him wasn't simply an act of love. It was Simon's way of keeping a part of his father alive, blending memory with hope. From that moment, Simon became determined to pass down something far more valuable than fame or fortune. He wanted Eric to grow up grounded, to understand effort, kindness, and gratitude. No convoys, no special treatment, Simon often said. He didn't want Eric to be another spoiled celebrity child. Instead, he wanted him to know what it meant to earn things. Slowly, Simon's world began to change. The man who once lived for ratings, contracts, and production deals started saying no to projects, to travel, to anything that took him away from home too long. The flashing lights of television took a back seat to bedtime stories, school runs, and laughter echoing through the living room. He found himself in places he never thought he'd be, sitting in small chairs at school events, helping with homework, or cheering from the sidelines at children's games. And whenever Eric stumbled, Simon was there, not as the untouchable music mogul, but as a father ready to guide, protect, and reassure. He didn't just observe his son's life from a distance, he lived it with him. And as he did, something remarkable happened. The once relentless businessman began to soften. The noise of showbiz faded, replaced by the quiet joy of fatherhood. He still worked, work was part of who he was, but now his schedule revolved around Eric. With every passing day, Simon felt emotions he thought had vanished forever. After losing both his parents, he had closed off parts of his heart, convinced he'd never feel that kind of love again. But Eric changed all of that. His laughter, his curiosity, his small hand reaching for Simon's, it all brought a warmth that healed something inside him. Each day became a collection of priceless moments. The morning giggles, the bedtime talks, the quiet walks, hand in hand. And though life seemed perfect on the surface, Simon began to notice things that didn't quite fit. Small things, subtle things. Eric wasn't like other children, not entirely. At first, the signs were easy to overlook. Tiny quirks, little habits that seemed harmless, but they lingered in Simon's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. And being the attentive father he had become, he started to watch closely every reaction, every silence, every glance. It wasn't fear that moved him. It was instinct, that quiet voice that creeps in and refuses to fade. Without realizing it, he began changing small things in his routine. How he watched, how he listened, how he noticed. He didn't bring it up to anyone, not even close friends, but he could feel it, a quiet tension building within him, a sense that something was shifting beneath the surface. As Eric grew from a playful toddler into early childhood, that quiet concern began to take root. Simon had always been a protective father, but now that protectiveness deepened into something heavier. Every smile, every laugh, every silent stare felt like it carried meaning. It wasn't the usual kind of parental worry. It came from love, yes, but also from connection. A connection so deep that he couldn't ignore the subtle signs others might have missed. Eric was different, not in a bad way, but in a way that made Simon pay closer attention. As his second birthday approached, one detail started to gnaw at him. Eric still hadn't spoken a single clear word. While other children were stringing together sentences, his little boy remained quiet, caught in his own world. At first, Simon convinced himself it was fine. He's just taking his time, he'd tell himself. Boys talk later sometimes, but those words didn't silence the unease inside him. It returned every time he saw Eric sitting quietly, lips moving, but no sound coming out.
He told himself not to overthink it, but deep down he knew this wasn't just about patience. Whenever they went out, to a store, a restaurant, even a friend's house, Eric would cover his ears, shut his eyes tight, and turn away from the world. Loud noises, flashing lights, or too many people seemed to make him retreat. He brushed it off at first. He's sensitive, he thought. He'll grow out of it. But the pattern didn't fade. It repeated itself again and again, even in places that should have felt safe. Friends and family tried to reassure him. "Don't stress," they said. "Every child develops differently." Their words were kind, but they bounced right off the wall of Simon's intuition. He couldn't shake the feeling that his son saw the world through a lens completely his own. Simon's career had always depended on reading people, spotting the smallest details others overlooked. It was what made him successful. But with Eric, he felt lost. Every instinct that usually guided him suddenly failed. He couldn't read his own son, and that terrified him. At night, when the world went quiet, the thoughts got louder. Sleep became a stranger. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, running through every memory, every moment, every sign he might have missed. He'd ask himself over and over, "Am I doing enough? Am I missing something important?" Desperation turned into determination. He began researching books, articles, late-night forums, medical journals, anything that might help him understand. He wanted answers. He wanted to know what was happening inside his son's world. But the more he read, the more questions piled up. What if this wasn't just a phase? What if this was something bigger than he was ready to face? Still, one thing remained unshaken: his love for Eric. Whatever this was, Simon knew he would face it head on. For the first time in his life, nothing else, no career, no fame, no expectation, mattered more than understanding his son. The deeper he dug, the more he realized how complex it all was. Eric's condition didn't reveal itself all at once. It crept in quietly, piece by piece, until Simon understood this was going to take more than just patience and care. And yet, even in the midst of uncertainty, there was something remarkable about Eric. His intelligence wasn't loud or boastful. It was subtle but undeniable. He noticed everything. He could figure out how things worked without anyone showing him. His eyes scanned the world with a quiet awareness that most adults never even reached. But when it came to expressing himself, Eric had his own unique language. It wasn't made of words. It was made of glances, gestures, and tiny movements that spoke volumes to a father who was learning to listen differently. Over time, Simon began to see that his son wasn't behind. He was just walking a different path, one that didn't look like anyone else's.
And the worry that filled Simon's heart didn't come from disappointment. It came from love, a deep, protective love that made him want to move mountains if it meant Eric could thrive. His focus shifted entirely. The fame, the critics, the spotlight, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered were the small victories, the moments when Eric met his gaze or made a sound that hinted at connection. To Simon, those moments were bigger than any standing ovation. Beneath those flashes of joy, he knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be different, harder, yes, but filled with meaning, and he was ready to face it. To the world, Simon Cowell was still the unshakable figure on television, the man who built an empire on sharp wit and brutal honesty. But behind closed doors, his world had quietly transformed. The man who once chased ratings and deadlines was now chasing something far more fragile and precious: understanding. Eric had made only a few public appearances, but one in particular stood out. The day he pressed the golden buzzer on Britain's Got Talent. The audience erupted in cheers. Viewers at home melted at the sight of that tender father-son moment. For many, it was proof that Simon Cowell had softened. But what they didn't see was the care behind that moment. Nothing about that day was spontaneous. Simon had spent weeks preparing, making sure every sound, every light, every person around Eric made him feel calm and safe. He had learned to craft Eric's world piece by piece, tuning it like a song only a father could hear. When the media later called it Simon's softer side, they only caught the surface. They didn't know the truth, that this wasn't about softness. It was about evolution, about a father reshaping his entire life for the love of one little boy who changed everything. He was changing his life, not for fame, not for fortune, but for someone who saw the world through a different lens. Simon wasn't just cutting back on work. He was reshaping his entire existence. The man who once lived for his next big deal began turning down offers that would take him too far from home. His calendar, once packed with global commitments, slowly began to revolve around one person, his son, Eric. At first, people brushed it off. It's just what new dads do, they said. They assumed the old Simon would return once the excitement wore off, but they were wrong. This wasn't a phase. It was a transformation, a complete shift in how Simon saw his world. Online, whispers grew louder. Some fans noticed subtle changes in Eric, the way he reacted differently in public, how his focus seemed to wander, how Simon appeared unusually protective. Rumors spread, theories piled up, and the internet did what it always does best, speculate. But Simon didn't engage. He didn't explain, argue, or feed the fire. Instead, he poured every ounce of his energy into the one thing that mattered most, Eric's well-being. His son didn't walk the same path as other children, and Simon learned to embrace that. Eric had his own rhythm, his own pace, his own way of seeing life, and for Simon, that became the only standard that mattered. Behind the curtain of fame, Simon was relentless. He reached out to specialists, booked appointments, filled notebooks with observations and questions. He read every article, listened to experts, and sat through long discussions about child development. Some conversations gave him hope, others deepened his worries. But Simon never stopped searching. He wasn't just trying to find answers. He was learning how to love and support his son in the way Eric needed most. And somewhere along that journey, something inside Simon changed forever. The man who had built an empire on judging talent, who could spot flaws in a performance within seconds, was now being taught a deeper lesson by his own child. Eric wasn't asking for perfection. He was showing his father the beauty of imperfection, patience, and unconditional love. The most precious moments didn't happen in studios or on red carpets. They happened in quiet corners, bedtime routines, morning giggles, or shared silences where Eric felt safe enough to be himself. Those were the moments Simon held on to tightly. They meant more than awards, ratings, or headlines ever could. Still, the outside world didn't stay silent. Speculation in the press grew louder. Journalists wanted answers. Fans wanted statements. But Simon knew, when the time came to speak, it had to be on his terms, in a way that protected Eric. Until then, he stayed laser-focused on what truly mattered, helping his son feel seen, heard, and understood in a world that never slowed down for anyone. And then, just when things seemed to be settling, life threw them another curve. It happened on what was supposed to be a perfect family trip. Eric was only 4 years old. Simon had planned every detail, imagining simple, happy days together. But what began as a dream vacation would soon reveal something that would break his heart. Eric's diagnosis.
He wanted time away, a real break from flashing lights, long meetings, and endless noise. All he wanted was quiet days with his son. But when they finally arrived, the peaceful getaway he'd imagined started to fall apart, piece by piece. Eric struggled with everything. At first, Simon brushed it off. Maybe it was travel fatigue, or just the challenge of being somewhere new. But soon, the signs grew too loud to ignore. The resort was alive with music, chatter, and clinking dishes. A place meant for fun, but for Eric, it was chaos. From the start, he didn't handle the new environment well. He turned away from unfamiliar food, refused to sleep at the usual time, and grew uneasy with every small change. Each shift in routine, each strange sound or flash of light pulled him further into distress. Then came that one evening, the moment that changed everything. Families filled the terrace, laughing, talking, sharing stories over the hum of music. But in the middle of it all, Eric froze. His small hands shot up to his ears, his eyes squeezed shut. He began rocking back and forth as though trying to block out a world that had suddenly become too loud, too bright, too much. The clinking dishes, the overlapping voices, the background music, they all collided into a storm only he could feel. Simon tried to comfort him, speaking softly, reaching out with a steady hand, but Eric didn't respond. His son seemed locked behind an invisible wall, unreachable no matter how hard Simon tried. And for the first time, Simon realized he didn't know how to help. That night, long after the lights went out, he called Lauren. His voice was heavy, but calm. They both knew it. They couldn't keep guessing anymore. This wasn't about fear. It was about understanding. They needed answers. They needed to know how to truly help their son. The following months became a blur of hospital visits and quiet waiting rooms. Specialists observed Eric closely. They ran tests, took notes, and asked question after question about every detail, how he played, reacted, and communicated. Then one cold December morning in 2018, Simon found himself in a small office, waiting to hear what he already sensed deep inside. The doctor spoke gently. Autism spectrum disorder. 3 words. Soft, clinical, yet life-altering. Simon didn't flinch. He had expected it, but hearing it aloud made everything suddenly real. It wasn't a passing phase or something Eric would grow out of. It was part of who he was. As the explanation continued, Simon listened with a mix of fear, love, and fierce determination. He learned that Eric's brain processed the world differently. He needed predictability. He was sensitive to sound. He found safety in structure. But there were strengths too, ones few people noticed. Eric had an extraordinary memory. He could recognize patterns instantly and spot details others missed. When something captured his interest, his focus became razor sharp. The specialist described his condition as moderate. That meant challenges ahead, yes, but also potential, tremendous potential. Simon sat quietly, hands folded, his mind racing. He wasn't just hearing a diagnosis. He was meeting his son all over again, this time with understanding. Eric's world wasn't broken. It was just different. From that moment on, Simon knew his role had changed forever. He wouldn't just be a father. He would be his son's guide into a world that didn't always understand him. The goal was never to change Eric. It was to change the world around him, to shape it into something that let him grow freely. But the hardest part wasn't the diagnosis. It was figuring out how to live with it, how to face the world knowing what they now knew. Simon Cowell had spent his entire life in front of cameras, lights, and constant judgment. But Eric wasn't built for that kind of world. His peace and privacy mattered more than any spotlight. Simon knew he had to protect him, but deep down he also wanted people to see what made Eric so extraordinary. That evening, Simon sat beside Eric, who was quietly lining up his toy cars. Every single one had to be in the right place, perfectly aligned. The way Eric focused, steady, calm, and determined, captured Simon's full attention. In that moment, something clicked. Eric wasn't missing anything. He wasn't broken or lost. He was different, and that difference wasn't something to fix. It was something to understand and celebrate. The diagnosis didn't just give them answers. It gave Simon perspective. Suddenly, his past decisions made sense. All those times he canceled trips, skipped loud events, or hovered protectively, it wasn't coincidence, it was instinct. His heart had been guiding him long before he even knew what Eric needed. Now there was clarity. Eric needed speech therapy to find his words, occupational therapy to build coordination, and behavioral support to handle the chaos of everyday life. And Simon had to transform himself. He had to learn, read, study, ask questions, and adapt. He had to let go of his old ways and create new ones that fit Eric's world, not his own. The life Simon once knew was fading fast. Every decision now began with one question: will this help Eric? Fame, red carpets, constant travel, all of it started to lose meaning. His days became quieter, more structured, centered around one little boy. The unpredictable world he once thrived in gave way to something steady.
For Eric, structure was safety, predictability was peace. So Simon built a life that reflected that. Back home in Malibu, he didn't waste a moment. He brought in specialists, therapists, and designers to help reshape their space. Lights were softened, harsh noises reduced. Even fabrics and textures were chosen with care. Every room had a clear purpose. Every corner was intentional. The house transformed into a safe haven, a world made for Eric. A place where he could explore, play, and just be himself without the constant pressure of the outside world. Simon's days started early, filled with small tasks to ease Eric into his routine. Then came therapy sessions, some for speech, others for motor skills. Even play dates had to be planned down to the smallest detail. To outsiders, it looked simple, effortless. But behind every peaceful moment was careful thought, coordination, and love. Simon Cowell, the man who once ruled the world of entertainment, was now building something far more meaningful. A world where his son could feel safe, understood, and loved for exactly who he was. Simon replayed every moment in his mind, making sure Eric never felt overwhelmed. He studied the little things, what made his son smile, what made him retreat, what sounds calmed him. Their connection didn't grow through words or long talks. It deepened through quiet effort, through patience, and through time. But while Simon learned how to guide Eric's world, he was also wrestling with emotions he never saw coming. He wasn't sad about who Eric was, not even close. What hurt were the dreams he had once painted in his mind. The carefree road trips, the shared laughter, the father-son banter over silly jokes. Those things didn't come easily, if at all. Instead, Simon found beauty in the small signals. Eric didn't communicate the way most kids did. His language came in movements, in glances, in subtle gestures. Bit by bit, Simon learned what each sign meant. A tap on the table might mean, "I'm okay." A look toward the window might mean, "I need space." Slowly, those moments became their own secret language, a bond that didn't need words. Therapy sessions tested both patience and hope. Simon watched Eric work tirelessly to shape sounds that refused to form. In occupational therapy, he saw his son practice movements to tolerate textures, noises, and sensations others took for granted. Every tiny milestone was a victory. One extra word, one longer hug, one fleeting moment of eye contact. Each one filled Simon's heart with pride. But behind those small wins was sacrifice. Simon began turning down projects, big ones. He passed responsibilities to trusted colleagues, rearranging his entire career around his son's needs. Still, staying strong was never simple. The nights grew longer, lonelier. The silence in his home often carried the weight of what he couldn't share. Even those closest to him didn't truly understand the pressure. Every decision Simon made was careful, deliberate. There was no room for mistakes. Late at night, he would sit by Eric's bedside, watching his son breathe softly in sleep. Those quiet hours when the noise of fame disappeared were when the responsibility hit hardest. People asked questions, some kind, others prying, but Simon kept his answers short, guarded. Eric's life wasn't a story for public judgment. He refused to turn his son into a headline. He wasn't sad because Eric was different.
He was afraid of a world that might never take the time to see how extraordinary that difference truly was. That fear became his driving force, to build a space where Eric could thrive, even if the rest of the world didn't understand. But the bubble they'd created at home couldn't hold forever. By 2019, cracks began to form. The whispers started small. Online gossip threads, quiet speculations about Eric's condition, and suddenly, the private life Simon had fought so hard to protect was slipping out of his hands, one rumor at a time. What began as passing comments soon grew louder, sharper, and harder to ignore. Idle curiosity about Eric's development turned into a public guessing game, one that made Simon's stomach twist every time he saw his son's name mentioned online. Strangers spun their own stories, drawing wild conclusions about a boy they didn't even know. Some meant well, but their kindness came with ignorance. Others repeated old damaging myths about autism, words that cut deep and reminded Simon how cruel assumptions could be. It stirred something fierce inside him, a protective fire he'd never felt before. People close to him told him to stay quiet, to let the noise fade. But how could he? Silence would only make things worse. He wrestled with it for weeks. If he said nothing, the false stories might grow unchecked. But if he spoke, he risked dragging Eric into a spotlight he had never asked for. The decision tore at him. Then one day, a line was crossed. A tabloid published photos of Eric, taken during a difficult moment when loud noise and chaos had overwhelmed him. They twisted the story, mocking what they didn't understand, turning a child's struggle into cheap entertainment. That was it, the breaking point. Simon couldn't stay silent anymore. He sat down, took a deep breath, and wrote a message. It wasn't long or calculated. It was honest, gentle, and from the heart. He shared that Eric was autistic. He asked for respect, for understanding, and reminded the world that his son was happy, deeply loved, and simply saw life through a different lens. That short message spread faster than he expected. Letters poured in, from parents who understood, from advocacy groups who thanked him, from fans who stood by him. For a moment, it felt like the world was finally listening. But soon, Simon realized that with every bit of awareness came new eyes watching too closely. Whenever Eric appeared in public, people analyzed everything. His smile, his silence, the way he moved. Everyone had an opinion, and most missed the point entirely. Simon had wanted to end the rumors, to protect his son. But the truth, once spoken, came with its own storm. News outlets turned Eric's diagnosis into a spectacle. His privacy shrank. The weight of it all pressed harder each day. Still, Simon refused to give in. He decided to fight smarter, to use his platform to educate, to shine light on the truth about autism, what it really meant and what it didn't. He spoke about early support, empathy, and the beauty of seeing the world differently. He reminded people that autism wasn't a limitation, but a different way of being. Yet even as he became a voice for others, he drew a firm line. He would never let the public into Eric's private world again. That part, the love, the laughter, the quiet victories, belonged only to them. He knew that being open came with risks. The public could be unpredictable, and not everyone cared to understand. What hurt most wasn't just the criticism, but the belief that Eric's autism was something broken that needed fixing, instead of something beautiful that deserved acceptance. Still, amid all that noise, moments of kindness reminded Simon why he shared their story. Parents reached out with gratitude, saying his honesty gave them strength. Advocates thanked him for using his fame to shed light instead of shadows. Teachers and therapists wrote to say they felt seen and supported because of him. Those moments mattered. They helped Simon hold on when things got heavy. They reminded him that even if the road was hard, he wasn't walking it alone. Through all the misunderstanding and judgment, he found purpose, helping others feel visible, creating a world, even a small one, where love and protection for people like Eric could thrive. This was a different kind of fatherhood, one that didn't follow the script he once imagined. As the months rolled by, Simon began to change deeply, in places no one could see. He wasn't losing his son, he was letting go of the version of fatherhood he had built in his mind. He had once envisioned teaching Eric to ride a bike, laughing about school friends or hearing playground stories, moments that had seemed so ordinary, so certain. But after Eric's diagnosis, Simon had to dream differently. It didn't happen overnight, it came in quiet waves, small realizations that grew as he began to see life through Eric's eyes. The world looked different now. He started to understand people in new ways, especially those who struggled to communicate or felt overwhelmed by what others took for granted. Even watching talent shows began to feel different. He couldn't ignore that many gifted children never even made it to the stage, not because they lacked talent, but because the world wasn't built for them. That realization changed him. Everything began to take on new meaning. And this farewell, it wasn't just about saying goodbye to a dream, it was about letting go of a lifestyle. Before, Simon had freedom. He could plan trips at the last minute or walk into events without hesitation. But now, everything revolved around Eric's comfort. Loud noises, crowded rooms, unfamiliar places, any of them could be too much. So Simon adjusted. He started turning down invitations, skipping events that once filled his calendar. The simplest things, like dinner out or a plane ride, now needed structure and patience. It wasn't easy, but every choice came from love. And as his world grew smaller, his heart somehow grew larger. Still, the hardest part wasn't the daily challenges, it was the quiet heartbreak of letting go of the dreams he once held. He had imagined laughter, proud milestones, and easy moments of connection. But that road now looked different, full of unexpected turns neither of them had prepared for. But even with all that uncertainty, those dreams didn't vanish. They simply changed shape. Eric had his own kind of brilliance, subtle, powerful, uniquely his. The more she watched him, the more those strengths began to shine. But this journey would take time, and Simon knew he had to lift his son up, one small victory at a time. People close to him began to notice the shift. He spoke less. He smiled differently. Sometimes it seemed his mind was elsewhere, caught between love and quiet grief. He carried something that couldn't be put into words, a heaviness that surfaced during family gatherings or when he watched other children run and laugh with ease. It wasn't about love. His love for Eric never wavered. It was about the little moments he once thought they'd share. Birthday parties filled with friends, spontaneous father-son talks, the sound of Eric calling his name. Deep down, Simon feared some of those moments might never come. At school events, he'd clap and cheer with the other parents, his smile steady and warm. But behind it lived the truth. Every moment had been earned through hours of therapy, patience, and unwavering care. Nothing came easily. And yet, in losing one version of fatherhood, he found something far deeper. He began to form a bond with Eric that didn't rely on words. They spoke through glances, small gestures, and quiet understanding. It was a connection built on love, growing stronger every single day. By letting go of old dreams, Simon opened a door to new dreams, dreams that fit the world his son was creating, built on strength, patience, and unconditional love. So what do you think about the changes Simon made for his son? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe.